All right, let's make sure this works. All right, I think everyone can hear me. Typically, I can do it without a mic, but that's okay too. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight for our final public workshop for the Town Center Master Plan. Tonight, we're gonna kind of go over lessons learned, things we've seen, the public outreach, and then introduce a concept plan for all of you tonight. So the concept plan, again, this is not the final plan. This is to get your feedback on it. Again, we're moving in this direction of this is kind of what we've heard from the feedback from residents through the multiple surveys, through our meetings. Thank you all who have joined us through this whole process, through the charrette to tonight. And we'll kind of go through. And then afterwards, we'll have plenty of time to discuss what how you're feeling about the plan, what you feel it misses, where you see some more opportunities, and then we'll continue from there. So I'd like to turn it over to Kimberly from Colliers, and she will kind of jump right in.
Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. I do see a lot of familiar faces in the room, but for those of you that maybe haven't been to previous meetings, my name's Kimberly Baptiste with Colliers Engineering Design, and I'm here with Bridget Snover from our team. We're going to jump right into the presentation because we actually do have a lot of content to cover. But then as Paul alluded to, we want to open it up at the end, get any feedback from anyone here in the audience. If you're not comfortable raising your hand and speaking up in the group, we do have some boards on the side of the room that you can provide written comments on. We have some comment cards on the sign-in table you can also use to provide feedback. And then of course, our project website has a comment page and that is available 24/7. So if you think of something after you leave the meeting tonight, you can always log on to the website and leave comments that way as well. The only other thing I'll say before I jump in is I walked into this room tonight and I started coughing. So I have my waters and beverages here, but I'm going to apologize in advance if I interrupt my own presentation. So jumping in from an agenda perspective. Let's see if that works. Got it now. Okay, so I'm going to go through some quick project updates, give you a quick summary of what we've heard to date, as Paul alluded to, kind of the comments and feedback we've gotten that have really helped to inform where we are today with the conceptual master plan. I'm going to walk through that in detail and then talk a little bit about where do we go from here. So project updates. As we look at kind of the overall process, it looks like we're in the middle of the process, but I would say we're actually more like 80% through. The upfront information gathering, feedback, engagement process is really kind of a longer element of the overall process, but we are now kind of where we're refining the master plan, site-specific recommendations. Over the course of July, we'll really get into the implementation strategy and have a draft document to share with the community by August. Recap of engagement activities to date. So just as a reminder, we really started kind of engagement heavily in the fall of 2024. So from that time period, we've done a number of pop-ups within the community. This is our third public meeting. The first public workshop was a visioning workshop. How many people attended that back in December? The giant post-it, so a handful. How many people were at our design charrette back in March? Okay, great. So, you've been involved and engaged through the process, which we love. We love to see that continuity. But in addition to those in-person engagement opportunities, we've held a number of stakeholder meetings. We've had the project website, which has hosted a number of different public surveys. We've done meetings with the senior center. So there have been a variety of different ways that we've sought to solicit feedback from the community. So I did mention the project website. Again, it's newingtontowncenter.com. So this is just kind of a portal of project information. But as I mentioned, does have that comments page. We did do, after the design charrette, we did do an online version of the design charrette. So in addition to the about 80 people we had here on a Saturday morning for the design charrette, an additional 155 people took the online version of the design charrette as well. So all of that feedback was compiled to kind of inform where we are today. Any questions on kind of where we are in the process at this point? Okay. So community feedback. So we heard some comments that we would kind of put in what we would call a general bucket. So not necessarily specific to any location in the town center or specific site, but more kind of general comments. The importance of really maintaining that small town character that exists today. Really focusing and emphasizing pedestrian enhancements, recognizing, right, vehicles need to get in and around the town center, but wanting to make it a very pedestrian oriented and pedestrian friendly space. Enhancing and maintaining green spaces, so adding more greenery into the town center. Really looking at amenities that can make it more attractive and welcoming to visitors, and supporting additional small business attraction and retention. Okay, so we broke up the study area. If you've been to past meetings, you're aware we've broken up kind of the town center study area into what we call 3 sub areas. So the first one being Constitution Square, which is the area shown in this tealish color on this map. So we did get specific information related to Constitution Square through our community engagement. So feedback specific to that particular sub area of the town center. Expand the green space in Constitution Square to give it a little more flexibility, allow for a little bit greater amount of programming. Address the disconnected vehicular circulation. Strengthen gateways, look at additional streetscape enhancements. Consider reconfiguration of parking, which kind of ties into the vehicular circulation. And much like the general comment, the real focus and emphasis on improving pedestrian connectivity. With regards to our second sub area, which kind of is Lowry Place and the parcels on either side of Lowry Place. The desire to incorporate mixed use development along the corridor. There was consensus. It was one of the targeted questions we asked, but there was consensus to narrow Lowry Place to incorporate stronger bike ped accessibility along the streetscape, including planted buffer strips. Introducing a reduced setback on Lowry Place. So, sorry, do I need to get closer to this? Oh, that's okay. Introducing a reduced setback on Lowry Place, so bringing buildings closer to the street. And then any new construction, the consensus based on the feedback we got through the charrette and the survey and other conversations we've had with the community was really kind of limit new construction to 3 stories. And then the last sub area would be the Hartford Health site. Here, what we heard is the importance of kind of balancing the site as an opportunity for new housing development, but maintaining some level of open space and some level of community amenities and services. A desire to incorporate senior housing as well as townhomes. The importance of creating a strong connection to the Cedar Mountain Trail. And again, maintaining some of that naturalized area that exists on the site today. So there was obviously a lot of feedback that was taken through the design charrette, the survey, but that's kind of the distilled version of some of those key takeaways and where there was really strong consensus from the community around some of those various aspects. So all of that gets us to the preliminary town center master plan. So again, if you've been at previous meetings, the design charrette, you've seen this slide before, but the importance of just kind of recognizing these overarching design principles as part of the overall master plan. So making sure we're offering multimodal options, prioritizing spaces and places for human interactions, providing a mix of uses and functionality, and creating safe and welcoming spaces. And these are kind of the best practices of what defines a strong town center core. So also based on the feedback that we've heard from the community, we did ask some more specific questions about specific amenities or things that you would like to see in the town center. So this essentially is the distillation of what we've heard, a vision board of those types of amenities that the community said you would like to see incorporated. So additional green, including street trees, outdoor programming such as a giant chessboard that people could come and play on the street, right? That helps to bring people together, create some of those social interactions. More outdoor seating, more flexible spaces for outdoor programming and special events, the incorporation of public art, greening parking areas, providing more shade to create comfort for pedestrians using spaces in the town center. And again, as I mentioned before, really attracting and bringing in some locally owned businesses that support some of the needs of existing residents. So this is a lot to absorb. We're going to walk through this in way more detail. So I'm only going to spend about 10 seconds on this slide. But this collectively is the conceptual master plan for the town center. But we're going to break this up into easier, more palatable pieces as we go through each of the distinct sub areas. So we're going to start with Constitution Square. So we have kind of really identified 5 overarching enhancements for Constitution Square, which again, I'm going to talk about in more detail. So an emphasis on strengthening gateways and intersections, an emphasis on strengthening and enhancing pedestrian connections, which are highlighted where you see the number 2s, strategic opportunities for infill development, which are shown with number 3, an expanded community green space shown in number 4, and reconfigured parking is shown in number 5. So gateways and intersections, you can see those are circled here. The larger circles indicate a more substantial intervention from a design perspective. So those are your larger vehicular gateways on Main Street, at Cedar Street, really kind of bringing people into the town center. So doing enhancements at those locations that really announce, hey, you're arriving at somewhere special and somewhere different, creating that really welcoming environment. And then the smaller green circles are kind of those secondary gateways. So indicating the primary entrances into Constitution Square and the public parking and off of each of the 4 surrounding streets. So this slide is just giving some examples of representative signage from other communities that could be incorporated at those key gateways. The goal you'll see in a couple of slides, we've got kind of a hierarchy of potential signage concepts. The key there is continuity in the design to start really reinforcing a brand and a design aesthetic for the town center. So this is that pedestrian or the vehicular entrance off of Cedar Street into Constitution Square. We've got kind of 2 example renderings of what that could look like in the future. This one being the more, I would say, subdued iteration of that with just a monument sign that says Constitution Square, but you can see some additional landscaping enhancements and site enhancements, lighting to kind of create a more welcoming environment. And then a more robust gateway. So this is an overhead arch gateway that could be incorporated and could be scaled down to alleyways, could be scaled up to some of the larger intersections, but really create that more grand entrance to really recognize you're entering someplace special. We want to really kind of pronounce these entries to people traveling through and around the Constitution Square area. I mentioned wayfinding. So this is really the focus. Again, it's about creating a consistent brand and messaging. So this is just an example of a potential wayfinding hierarchy. So you've got the large arch, which could be used as kind of a larger gateway, a gateway sign example, a trailhead sign, consistent parking signage using Newington colors, pedestrian directional signage that could be located throughout the town center area, and then pole banner signs, again, kind of using that consistent brand and design to kind of reinforce that branding associated with the town center. So number 2 is pedestrian accessibility, and there's kind of 5 subsegments of pedestrian accessibility in Constitution Square. So the A where you see kind of the pink highlights on this graphic are indicating new pedestrian connections within the existing parking area and on the south side of Market. So those pink highlights are where there's not pedestrian accessibility today, unless you're crossing the pavement of the parking lot on your own, but where we would recommend designated pedestrian connections. So really one could comfortably traverse the entirety of the parking lot safely. This would include new sidewalks as well as green space associated with that. E is activating the existing pedestrian alley. So you've got this really nice connection from Main Street to the Constitution Square parking area. Slightly underutilized today because it doesn't have that really welcoming feel to it. So this is about how do we create a space that invites people to utilize it. C is a new pedestrian gathering area, which I will talk more about in just a minute. D is indicating enhancements to the Market Square streetscape. Market Square is already a wonderful street, but we have some ideas for just some additional simple interventions that can really kind of say, here's a core destination. And then E is activating the pedestrian alley adjacent to the Keeney building and better utilizing that space associated with potential future reuse of Keeney. So going into all of those in a bit more detail, and I don't have a pointer, but if I did, it would only point to the screen I'm looking at, not the ones you're looking at anyway. But with regards to the pedestrian connections through the parking areas, you can see on this graphic, just through kind of some of those cream colors, those would be all the new sidewalks that we would propose to introduce in and around the parking area. You can see some of those red lines are those enhanced crosswalks for pedestrians. So painting those a different color really alerts vehicular drivers to the presence of those crosswalks and the fact that people might be utilizing those crosswalks. So really helping to make those pop. And we are recommending that not only within the parking area of Constitution Square, but for all of the streetscape crossings around Constitution Square as well. So here's that existing pedestrian alley that I mentioned. And here's some recommended enhancements to that alley. So not major changes to the alleyway, but adding some additional lighting to make it comfortable for people at all times of day, adding some additional plantings and greenery, some seating areas, just really helping to activate that space and make it a welcoming space for people to walk through. This pedestrian gathering area, so here's an existing view. I'm just going to go back to the plan view real quick, just so everyone can see. Yes, 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 you are. Yes, top is Cedar, where the D is Market. So C is the area I'm now talking about. So that's an existing piece of land adjacent to the existing plaza space. It is privately owned, but it is underutilized in its current condition, not really fully utilized as parking or access to those existing businesses. Some people use it to walk to Market Square, but largely underutilized. So one of our recommendations would be to formalize that space as a pedestrian space and create some more vibrant activity in that area for pedestrian use, access to those businesses that line that pedestrian space. Again, incorporating shade trees, incorporating greenery, seating areas, just creating another active pedestrian space within the downtown core. D is Market Square streetscape. So again, Market Square is already a great street today. But really looking at emphasizing the center of Market Square, where the vehicular entry into the public parking area is. So really emphasizing enhancements in that area in addition to the enhancements that have already been implemented to date. So incorporating overhead string lights, signage, looking at signage design guidelines for businesses moving forward in the future, emphasizing some additional pavement delineations to say, hey, you're entering kind of a shared pedestrian vehicular space, and then incorporating wayfinding. This is just a representative image from another community that kind of highlights some of those key recommendations of, again, different design elements that could be incorporated into that center area of Market Square to really demarcate it as somewhere special within the town center and to kind of clearly highlight that entryway into the public parking area. And then the last of the pedestrian recommendations. So these are existing images of the alleys behind the Keeney building, if you haven't ventured back there or taken the time to really kind of understand what those spaces look like. And our recommendations, and again, this would probably be closely tied to any future enhancement or investment of the Keeney building itself. But really, they are narrow spaces. So it's really about just activating those spaces as additional ways for pedestrians to kind of experience the town center, access some new spaces, potentially access the rear of some of the buildings on the south side of Market Square, really focusing on some more artistic interventions. So adding pops of color, adding opportunities to integrate public art, murals, painting on the pavement, but just formalizing those spaces a little bit so they are functional, usable spaces within the town center area. So infill development in Constitution Square, we've identified kind of 3 primary opportunities, 2 along Cedar Street, and then 1 at kind of a vacant site on Market Square. So you can see here in plan view what some of those kind of building footprint opportunities are. So where you see A, there's an opportunity for about a 5,000 plus or minus square foot building footprint that would replace the existing building. At B, there's currently a vacant site where you could fit an approximately 3,400 square foot new building footprint. And then a larger vacant site on Market Square, which is indicated by C, gives you about an opportunity for about a 7,000 square foot building footprint. So these could be potential opportunities for commercial uses or potentially market use or mixed uses where you could incorporate some residential on the upper stories. Constitution Square, the existing green space. So this was a topic that got a lot of support through our community engagement and charrette. There were a lot of different ideas around the green space, kind of universal. It should be expanded a little bit greater than it exists today. Some people suggested moving it. Some people suggested kind of really significant expansion. After kind of a lot of different discussion and dialogue with the steering committee and distilling, kind of balancing all of the different feedback that we got, right? Because there's the more you expand the green space, the more parking you're taking away. There are some trade-offs that our design team and the steering committee needed to consider. So ultimately, we decided on an expansion of the existing green space and determined that keeping it central really did have some overall benefits for its use, especially when done in tandem with creating stronger and safer pedestrian access and connectivity to the green space. So as depicted, the additional green space grows by about 4,100 square feet. It does eliminate 23 parking spaces, but it gives you enhanced opportunities for some additional shade trees, additional flexible programming, potentially adding additional amenities for community members, a performance pavilion. So that additional space can have a pretty significant impact on the way that space can be used. And that does tie in. So mentioned we lost 23 parking spaces associated with that green space expansion. One of the other things we looked at, so we've got a lot of public parking within Constitution Square, but adjacent to that, on the backside, primarily on the backside of Market Square so I can explain this. The buildings on the north side of Market Square, behind them is a lot of private parking as well. So one of the things we looked at that is very kind of chopped up, a lot of, limited access between those private parking areas, limited access between the private parking areas and the public areas. So people access those private parking lots, have to go back to Market Square, can't access kind of the broader amenities within the larger Constitution Square. So we did look at reconfiguring that public parking as we were also looking at reconfiguration of the public parking areas. So this is showing opportunities for kind of shared parking agreements between different property owners. Some uses need more parking during the day. Some uses need more parking during the night. So it creates an opportunity to really think holistically about parking in Constitution Square and how we can provide the best parking experience for users, but also making sure individual businesses have their needs met. So this reconfiguration, which does open up access between parking areas, creates an additional 51 spaces as a net because you're getting rid of some of those dead spaces that were created by some of those private lots. So this is something that would certainly need more discussion, more analysis, more conversations with those private property owners. But we thought important to kind of lay on the table as part of this planning process to kind of open the door for those future conversations. Yes. Where you are. Sure. Okay. Nope. And I can, in the interim, I can do a better job kind of laying the context as but yes, in the plan itself, we will make sure kind of there's a lot of additional labels added for context. So thank you. Yes. Yep. Total increase overall. Well, you're picking them up in this space where the private spaces are. Yes. You're losing 23. If nothing happened to the private spaces that exist today, you're losing 20 because of the additional green space. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We did talk about that for special events, right? When you do have larger volumes, right? Like we never want to plan parking for the worst case scenario of the special event that occurs 10 times a year in the town center or anything. So we did talk about that. Does the senior center offer? I'm like, I know I saw you earlier. You're hiding back there. Thank you. Yes. We have not specifically looked at no. Yep, definitely agree. Wayfinding signage is huge, and kiosk signage, other, ways to inform people of all the different types of businesses that are within a walking distance from any of those parking spots. Yep. Yep. I see one other hand. Yep. We will make recommendations in the plan for specific species, which is why we have our landscape architects on board as well to really be taking that into consideration on what types of species are going to be appropriate given certain spaces and kind of other considerations. %. Yep. Yep. 100%. No snow well. Okay. So then the last, well, I guess that was the last item in Constitution Square. So, okay. So moving on to Lowry Place in Northwood Plaza area, sub area. So again, based on what we heard from the community, we knew the emphasis here really needed to focus on vehicular circulation, enhancing some of that streetscape character. So Lowry Place wasn't just a street that cars zoom through at 60 miles per hour, a cut through. Increasing and enhancing bicycle and pedestrian circulation, and really looking at and considering an appropriate development scale and character. So the build out of Lowry Place and Northwood Plaza. So I'm going to walk through this and then I'll give some caveats as it relates to Northwood Plaza. But the number one up here, so this is number one is showing Lowry. So streetscape enhancements, including the incorporation of a multi-use trail. I will show you more images of that. Adaptive reuse of the existing Keeney building. Mixed use infill, which is depicted by number 3, which is at the corner of Lowry Place and Constance Lee. The existing vacant parcel at the end of the Keeney building. And 4 is Northwood Plaza. And you'll see in subsequent slides, we actually have 3 phases of enhancement or kind of development of Northwood Plaza, because we recognize kind of why there might be a bigger vision, that will not happen overnight. So looking at how change at that particular site could happen over time and in phases. Infill is new development on an existing parcel. So this is a cross section of how Lowry Place looks today. So you've got really wide drive lanes, about 20 feet each. Really kind of best practice could be anywhere between 11 and 12. So you've got a lot of excess roadway there. You've got an 8-foot sidewalk only on the south side of the street. And then you've got some kind of we'll call it a planting strip, but some grass area on the north side. So this is the recommended enhancement to Lowry Place. So in lieu of the 20-foot lanes in each direction, we would reduce those to 12 feet in each direction. 12 feet is an applicable, appropriate standard for fire access, emergency access, truck access. So best practice, 12 foot. This then frees up and allows us to maintain that 8-foot sidewalk on the south side, but add a 4-foot green buffer to help green the streetscape. Allows for a significant green buffer on the north side, as well as a 12-foot multi-use trail. So the 12-foot multi-use trail would allow for safe, separated from the street, use of the trail by both pedestrians and bicyclists. So again, multi-use trails can be as wide or as narrow as 8 feet. 12-foot is a really robust, nice kind of width for a multi-use trail that does very comfortably allow for that multiple uses safely, comfortably. So it was really, when thinking about this, we thought it was important, you know, if someone's coming to the town center with their kids on a bike, wanting to make sure there was a separated facility from the roadway where you could have that level of comfort of bringing a family, a stroller, a variety of users onto the street. So just to kind of give you a sense of how that would look in the future, so you can see this is just an existing image of Keeney from Lowry Place today. And this is how it would look once you start to incorporate that multi-use trail, add some additional greenery, some of those street trees. The larger Keeney block, we did not recommend any substantial changes to the Keeney building, really focusing on how the existing space could be enhanced and reused in the future as an existing building footprint, but did look at the vacant parcel at the end of the Keeney block, again, at that corner of Lowry and Constance Lee. So just going into that in more detail. Again, really focusing the Keeney building on enhancements to the existing building. This is a rendering from a package the owners of Keeney submitted to the town back in 2022. Never moved forward exactly as depicted, but gives you a sense. This is the facade from Main Street of how that building can be enhanced and really kind of better play into some of the design standards of for the town center. And again, this is just another image from that same design package. So just giving you a sense of the aesthetic possibilities. Yes.
So right now, it's pretty much they are still looking for options. We all know that they're still utilized. They have approval for the retail. Started doing the build out of that. They have kind of hold. We have been in discussions with them, but I think a lot of companies working on that. They put it on the market, and then they took it back. Okay, they still are interested. Haven't that final vision yet of how. So that one is actually zone plan. So that zone is actually retail and kind of a plan development time, formerly industrial. Now it's plan development time found by our county.
Yes. Not on Lowry, no. Does the town have a policy on e-bikes?
Right now, that is kind of emerging. Most of the time, I've seen that would be more of a regular. So, it is
Okay. So getting back to the zoning question or like allowable uses at Keeney. So one of the things we're considering as part of this overall study when we get into kind of implementation strategy is any recommendations around zoning code changes. So once we have a kind of an agreed upon concept plan, we want to make sure that the concept plan is proposed can be implemented. And the way that those types of projects get implemented is through the town zoning code. So specific to the Keeney building, these are the uses that really came out of our community engagement for types of uses that the community would like to see within that building. So additional retail, particularly along Main Street, kind of creating an indoor marketplace, having opportunities for large scale performance spaces and uses, the creation of a business incubator, kind of a brewery craft drink hub, right? Where maybe you have multiple different uses that are coming together in one space, or something like a food hall oriented marketplace. An artist collective was also an idea that kind of came up multiple times through the public outreach, and opportunities again for larger scale indoor recreation amenities. So one of the things we'll be looking at, talking about with the town and the steering committee is, do we want to make any recommendations to that plan development zoning designation to make sure we're maybe not facilitating uses that the community doesn't want to see in Keeney in the future, while still giving it some level of flexibility to respond to market demands and kind of what the market is dictating. So more on the zoning piece of it to come, but just wanted to make you aware that was something that we will be addressing as part of this process. So then we talked about kind of new development on that vacant parcel at the kind of far end of the Keeney building. So again, this is the picture of the green space of the vacant parcel. We're looking at it like we're on Lowry Place, looking north. Representative image showing type of development that could go there, again, based on what we heard from the community is community preferences, mixed use building, up to 3 stories, fairly close setback to the street. So the potential build out of that site, and again, what you see here is conceptual, right? A developer is ultimately going to come in, figure out the right footprint for themselves, figuring out the right building configuration. But what we're doing here is just giving you a sense of kind of the scale and level of development that could occur on the site. So in this case, we're looking at 2 mixed-use structures, again, that would kind of face the street frontages with parking in the rear. This would allow for about 21,000 square feet of new commercial space and about 44 new apartment rental units. So we've broken it up as 32 1-bedroom, 12 2-bedroom. Again, that mix would be totally subject to a developer and what they saw as their market demand, but this is what could fit on the 2nd and 3rd levels of those 2 structures. The space allows for 36 on-site parking spaces, and you might do the math and say, well, you just told me 44 housing units, and now you're telling me only 36 parking spaces. However, owned by the same owners of the Keeney building, and if you reorganize the space at the far end, the eastern end of their site, you can actually pick up an additional 60 parking spaces. With cross access, you would end up with 96 additional spaces available on that site. So does have the space to accommodate parking needs. They would not be covered, no. This would be surface parking. We did look at the potential, because it did come up in the community outreach, a parking garage. What I will say is that parking garages are about $35,000 per space. You currently do not charge for parking in the town center of the town of Newington. I suspect that in and of itself may not go over well if you started charging for parking in the town center of downtown Newington. So being able to recoup the costs of developing a parking garage would be very challenging in this market today. A developer might come in the future and say it's a good opportunity for their site, but kind of the preliminary mathematics don't really work at this point. Yep, yep, yes. And there are, like, like we showed in a previous image, like shade sails, and there are other treatments that certainly could be incorporated. It's all owned by the same property owner. Um, yep, yep, correct. Yeah, right. Yep, yep. You, yep, yep, right, right. Yep, you bring up a great point, and this is right, like, this is the vision plan. The market element is critical and important, and we're going to touch on that, right? Because these are all not guaranteed successful projects. So you bring up a good point, and we will talk more about that in just a few slides.
Again, take those with a grain of salt. We were just trying to give an example of, to give you a sense of what could fit. A developer might come in and say, the market's telling me we need 3-bedroom apartments in the town, right? And they might say we can do 24 3-bedroom units, but ultimately a developer would come in and decide the program. This was just a snapshot of hypothetically what could be. So Northwood Plaza. So as I mentioned, we've kind of identified 3 potential phases for build out of Northwood Plaza over time, recognizing, right, the demand for kind of a full redevelopment is probably not happening in the immediate future, kind of to your point of market demand and market realities. So phase 1 is really about site enhancements. So some facade enhancements to the existing structure, improved vehicular circulation within the site itself, an enhanced landscape buffer along the street, and enhanced signage on and within the site and along the structure. So keeping the existing plaza, sprucing it up essentially. Phase 2 of Northwood Plaza is retaining the existing structure, still doing some of those site enhancements that we talked about in phase 1, but introducing building footprints along Lowry Place. So those would be the 2 orange buildings next to each other. So in addition to 2 mixed-use buildings, also created some additional community gathering space, which you can kind of see, I guess that we call it a mint green color. That would have some outdoor seating, could provide opportunities for, if you had a restaurant on the first floor, outdoor seating for that. But as depicted, right, you've got about 23,000 square feet of first floor use, and then the potential
Again, just a hypothetical program for about 56 apartment units. And we just focused on 1 and 2 bedroom, but again, that program could vary depending on what developer saw is the need from a residential program. We do know there is the capacity and the need for additional apartment rentals in the town based on our initial market analysis that we presented at previous meetings. I will say the commercial space in both of these projects, so the vacant site adjacent to Keeney, as well as this, is a little more challenging. But as you bring more people into the downtown, the town center that are living here, you create expanded opportunities to fill that retail. So it is very likely if any of these mixed use projects were to go forward, the residential would fill first, the commercial would follow the residential. Phase 3, full redevelopment. So again, this is a longer term vision where you now have demolition of the plaza, the potential, right? If you look at demolishing the plaza, the potential to talk to those existing tenants and say, hey, move into the new retail spaces in the new buildings across the street. And then that back building, that new orange building that you see where the existing plaza is, would be strictly new multifamily residential. So you've got the mixed uses with the active commercial uses along the street of Lowry and Constance Lee. And you've got the opportunity for that larger scale multifamily in the rear. Again, those additional residential uses are bringing more people into your town center, creating more opportunities to bring additional retail to the town center as well. Also incorporated some green space for those multifamily tenants. So just to give you a sense of how that could look. So this was before the pickleball place came when we took this picture. But so we'll say Northwood today, but Northwood previously. This would be phase 1 enhancements. So again, just some facade improvements, some greening of the site, some additional signage, landscaping. Phase 2, introducing those new mixed-use buildings along the street frontage. So again, don't get caught up in the architecture or liking the specific architectural style. It's more important to think about the concept and the scale of kind of what you're seeing here compared to what exists today. So again, about that 15-foot setback from the road that was indicated as a preference, capping at 3 stories, which was by far and away the highest preference over keeping it 1 or 2 or going up to 5. And really just creating kind of some more vibrant public community gathering spaces. So then when you think about all of those changes collectively along the Lowry Place corridor, so here's a snapshot of the corridor looking east as you see it today. And here's how that would look in the future with kind of that full build out on both the plaza site, the multi-use trail, the reduction in the street width, and then on the upper left-hand corner of the image, the build out of that Keeney vacant property. It just helps you kind of think about, right, long-term vision to get to this level of build out, but gives you a sense of what could happen as different things align. Any thoughts or initial reactions after seeing that? You want to get to Hartford Health? On Lowry, any initial reactions? We'll keep him in suspense a couple more minutes. Yep. For the residential component, yes. Thank you. There is a ton of parking available on that site. I don't think we have the number of spaces off the top of our head. And I think there's that many spots on the site. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but again, to Paul's point earlier, right, that's something a developer is gonna have to figure out is if they move forward, because they're gonna wanna make sure they're not gonna rent an apartment unless they can guarantee a parking space to that tenant. So that's something they would be kind of working out as part of that. Is there room for a garage? There's room for a garage on the rear side of that site, yes, if that was an option. Okay, Hartford Health, I'm gonna go really slow. Okay, so the Hartford Healthcare site. So what we heard from the community is looking at a housing mix and density, making sure some public spaces and green space preservation is also prioritized and balanced as part of that development. Incorporate amenities and making sure there's still access to the property. So we kind of looked at this, and I'm going to talk through it in two different ways. First, I'm going to talk and walk through the public space elements, and then I'm going to walk through the development program. So public space enhancements, and this also has multiple phases to it, but public space enhancements. So we are proposing a kind of the continuation of that multi-use trail that we're proposing on Lowry to also go up Constance-Lee. So you're kind of creating that continuous accessibility, which is shown as number 1, which connects to number 4, which is a greenway corridor that would extend from Constance-Lee all the way up to a new trailhead and connection to Cedar Mountain, which is shown as number 5. So it's 1, 4, and 5 is really focused on multimodal connectivity. 2, and there you can see there's multiple number 2s on the map, is open space preservation. So where we've kind of said these areas would not be subject to further development, but would be maintained in a more naturalized state. Some of that is because of existing topography. Some of that is just kind of important green spaces that we heard from the community they wanted to preserve. 3, kind of adjacent to 5, where we've shown the new enhanced trailhead and parking for the trail connection. This is also an opportunity as part of that green space preservation to incorporate some level of public amenity. So we did show the dog park moving up to that area to keep it away from future, not to give away my future development, but to keep it away from new residential development. And also to kind of share the parking that would be part of the trailhead. And then 6 is sports courts, which could be publicly available, but really would be also integrated into that future housing development. So just kind of covered all of those, but just some kind of representative imagery. Again, number 1 being that multi-use path. Number 2 being open space preservation and opportunities for informal green space throughout the site. The new dog park, enhanced dog park with enhanced amenities. 4 being that greenway corridor, again, connecting all the way from the multi-use trail along the road up to the Cedar Mountain Trail. Designated trailhead parking. And then the incorporation of some sports courts and small scale recreation facilities. So those are the public space enhancements. So what does the development program look like? So we've got kind of 5 elements here. 1, the existing data center would remain. Why we are showing this as remaining is based on conversations with the current property owner. As they look to sell the property in the future, the data center is a separate parcel and would not be part of that sale. There is no intention currently to stop utilizing the data center as is. So our development program took the property owner's feedback into account as we looked at potential reuse scenarios. Yes. Yep. two, the area that you see kind of around two is active adult cottages. So this would be 55 plus housing, individual unit cottage style development. Three, active adult multifamily wellness complex. I will talk more about that. Four is showing townhomes. And five, future phase two, excuse me, would be mixed use buildings along Constance Lee, which would complement, again, that development that we're showing along the Lowry Place, Northwood Plaza area. But again, we would envision this is very far into the future based on market demand. Okay. So looking at those in more detail, the active adult cottages. So again, we heard from community members, senior housing should be prioritized. In speaking with a couple developers, local developers, and based on our market analysis, we see opportunity in the market for senior housing. So we wanted to make sure we were offering a variety of senior housing options as well. So the cottages would be for sale cottages, targeting 55 plus residents. Again, hypothetical program, but based on kind of the land area we have, accounting for parking, transportation, utilities, all of those other development elements, you could accommodate about 65 cottages on the site. Excuse me, Bridget, you're gonna have to take over. So we are working on that, but so jumping ahead to the market, I will say that is in progress. Thank you. I'll take that. Thank you. We don't have an exact price point now, but that will be included within maybe 250. So recognizing, right, not everyone 55 plus wants to take on buying a new housing unit. We did want to make sure that we were kind of responding to a diversity of market needs. So, you know, based on some of the work that we've been doing and some of the research and recognizing, you know, there's opportunity, some niche opportunities here in the town targeting kind of that 55 plus population. We also looked at the integration of what we're calling an active adult multifamily, the wellness complex. So this would include multifamily units for rent. So you've got your for sale options for 55 plus, and you've got your rental options. The difference here within kind of this element of the master plan would be that this multifamily opportunity and units would also incorporate other resources that might be beneficial or desirable by 55 plus residents. So the potential for medical office spaces, the potential for fitness center, recreation amenities, a market cafe program, a variety of different uses as part of the overall development that would be available for use not only by residents of that facility, but also the cottages and even potentially townwide, depending on how it was configured. There are examples across the country of similar developments, one being the Springs at Greer Garden out in Eugene, Oregon. It's kind of a really interesting case study, but there are a number of different case studies of these types of developments. So we know that there is interest and desire. This particular development has the multifamily component, has the cottage component, the recreation component, kind of the on-site access to food and different services. So kind of that full service living opportunity. So just kind of throwing it out there as inspiration and for consideration. Again, you would have to have a developer that is interested in moving forward this concept, but there is certainly precedent across the country for this type of development. The townhouse development, again, this would not intended to be 55 plus, but based on land area available for development. And again, these units might be on the small side, so this number of potential units could go down, it could be variable depending on the program. But if you were looking at about a 1,500 square foot unit, you could get just over 110 units on the site. And that does incorporate green space, parking, infrastructure, accessibility. So our first example, our first concept plan for the Hartford Health site showed kind of townhomes where the historic Hartford Healthcare Hospital is. There was some identification during the community outreach that people would love to see that historic structure retained. I don't know what the intention fully is of the current property owner to retain that structure. But we did want to also present and look at a program that if that structure was retained and potentially converted to multifamily units, you could still incorporate about 36 townhomes on that portion of the site as well. So the senior, the active adult program would stay the same. That would just really impact the townhome program. We do not have access to the building to really understand potential reuse, adaptive reuse costs or feasibility of saving that structure, but just wanted to show how that could potentially play out, just because it was identified by the public as being kind of a potential opportunity to save some of that historic fabric. Okay, so before we go on to next steps, any thoughts, comments on Hartford Health? And naturalized. It's both. Sure. So like looking at 1 and 2 on here and kind of the green areas around that, that's where you kind of have some of the topography that would make building challenging or impossible or cost prohibitive. The green space closer to Constance Lee, right? That's naturalized today. And based on what we heard from the community, right, they'd love to see some of that natural character retained because of its proximity to the data center. And we thought that would be a kind of a prime area to retain as green, as opposed to really focusing housing development around the data center, if the intention is to keep the data center really long term. And then maintaining that green space by the trailhead area. Again, that was identified by the public as kind of a prime opportunity to retain that natural character there and kind of serve as a buffer as well to the future development. I don't know if we measured that. Did we measure that? We can measure that. I don't exactly know what the distance would be from Constantly up to. Well, we can look into that. If you're gonna ask about surface. I mean, you do have to cross technically, yes, but I would say not heavily traverse streets. Yeah. Internal traffic, really. Any other thoughts, questions? Anything offensive? I mean, if you want, and Paul might yell at me because we haven't really talked about this, but if you want my gut, right, like, I do think elements of redevelopment on Hartford Health is probably one of your lower hanging opportunities, just because of the scale of development that could occur and some of the market opportunities for the types of development that are proposed on this site and the availability of the land in the near future. So I think this is an opportunity which again brings more people into the town center area. I think some of the public enhancements, whether it's the street narrowing or some of the other enhancements projects, right, create a great foundation for other investment. And I'm sure Paul would like to add something. Tell me he disagrees.
No.
In total, yes, probably. Yep.
So get the public amenities. Many of which are not covered. We've got grants for this. This is a pretty little thing. No doubt about it. But it's kind of moved it. It adds amenities that would mostly be used
On Hartford Health.
as opposed to the broader concept of having a magnet that is bringing all of some other towns. Doing town center, our things we talk about, touching school, public art, walking, perimeter walking, path for everybody, watching, cleaning, stuff like that. With the whole idea being that it would be a shared, live there, people visited there, we share this great public space. Short point, yeah, I think more, yeah, 400 is not enough people. It's 200, 600 support to generate the type of economic energy that's required for Market Square, the side, and for that new retail. So somehow, I think we have to balance community want of the low density, low rise type of housing. The fact that developers need time and and you want to attract retail, they need customers. So you need a lot more housing. A lot. So I'd like to see it all in place though. I would say that at the point, within the vibrant possible, town hall, other athletic community center, come out, or without a little surplus. So the question is, could this be economically sustainable? I think it's much more so. When we talked to developers, they were very clear. Minimum housing, living within zoning, with retail, get people, eat the restaurant,
Yep.
make it. Yes. Everything from at a lower level, communicating with developers, getting it out there. Second level of that, working with our representatives. Here is what we're pointing out directly, but working with our representatives and saying, what does anyone think? What we have. This is what uncle feels like. That it's not so good. So for every source you need, how can we come up with that? Don't know what's up. What housing? It's just because otherwise, you like it, don't like it, overcome it. This is both. We're bringing in businesses, retail, we're helping out our current small businesses grow, and we're creating places for people that play or own an area. A lot of our young people here, instead of going to Boston or New York, because they want to live in exciting communities, like, you know, for 2 years a year, and move them out of the homes that they may not want to live in, you know, 4 bedrooms, into the cottages, as Paul mentioned, other things, you know, that. I think it's a win-win in all ways. You know, there could be improvements, as Andy said, maybe additional housing that brings additional businesses. That's overall, that's what we want. Be in a room talking, be in a room talking. Rocky and I never figured. built this vision, character of the town, right? There's no 10-story skyscraper. No really intensity, but no probably not fit. This is really spread out, it's got green, it's walkable, and it's nice compared to what some developers would want to do just to make the maximum dollars. That can be for the whole process. That can be really tough.
No. It's a cool project to look at. Small world. We weren't involved in the project, but we were kind of looking at some different unique, right? Because you create something that's not available in the local market, right? And it creates some, attracts some of that additional demand and interest. So we were. Did you? Yep, that is market rate though. That's the right range for market rate rental units in the region.
That's kind of the fact. What do housing is a policy. Being a developer said, I'm gonna build, they, you have to build 20% affordable housing. They're gonna say, okay, for 300 units, right? Or they need subsidies. Everyone is out there, apartment housing, it's government program. Market do not deliver. So when you require it to zone, you're saying straight off of point, or saying you would high, very high. For that. That's kind of the issue. Newington and kind of the and while nowadays after another little before it goes. Some level always been I mean, it's not something you should fight. There's always a trade-off. There's a lot.
Which is a great segue from vision to reality. So just kind of continuing that conversation about kind of the market. So from, right, there are public realm investments that have been identified and recommended as part of this plan. And some people sometimes question, like, we're gonna spend all this money, you know, narrowing a roadway, putting in street trees, putting in greenery. What I will say is that public investment does ultimately pay off, right? It pays off from a financial perspective because it does create a very strong foundation for developers wanting to invest in a community. But it also, for local businesses, it increases foot traffic and the amount of people that are coming into an area, which has benefits to those local businesses, can increase property values over time, and certainly from a social quality of life perspective, right? So there are economic and more of those social oriented benefits from kind of that public investment. From a private development perspective, so we've been talking a lot about the market. We are looking at that, but we don't have hard numbers for you this evening. I can assure you we are looking at that very closely. For those of you that have come to previous meetings, you might recall meeting Tom from Camoin Associates. So we do have a market economic firm on our team who is looking at closely financial feasibility of the projects as depicted within this conceptual master plan. What he would share with you if he was here is downtown projects often, it's not Newington unique, often have a hard time penciling out in today's market with just construction costs, property costs, all of those kind of coming together. So oftentimes it does take subsidy, it does take additional funding, it does take incentives, whether at the town scale or coming from the state, to make projects work and pencil out. We are doing detailed financial feasibility analysis for each of the projects that will identify a specific dollar funding gap and what would be needed in order to really move those projects forward based on today's dollars. So we are kind of now ground truthing, talking to local developers and others in the community, some of our preliminary findings. But I will say, without some level of public investment, specifically, targeting the mixed use projects, these projects will likely not happen. A developer is not likely going to be able to come in and say, I'm going to build this tomorrow, unless they do get some of that public incentive. So just wanted to be transparent and upfront about that. And we've kind of hit on that topic a few times throughout the evening, but also wanted everyone to be aware there is more activity going on in the background related to that market side of things. So then what is next? So from a deliverables perspective, we will be continuing to gather your feedback and ideas and tweak and refine the concept master plan. But we will also be working on more of some of the policy planning, additional recommendations, zoning recommendations, and developing an overall implementation strategy that will kind of look at opportunities for phasing projects, identifying high priority projects, and pull that all together into a draft town center master plan. That town center master plan will be made available. It will be on the project website. We'll make sure we send out a notification to all email addresses when that draft document does become available. You will have the opportunity, additional opportunity after reviewing the actual plan to provide additional comments and feedback that will go to the steering committee to make decisions on how to incorporate comments. Ultimately, we will finalize the plan and then the town will move forward with implementation. So again, our target for the draft plan is August and having that available for public review in August. So just for kind of a tentative timeframe for everyone when you can expect to see something. It will be presented to the town council. Yes. We will post this presentation. It's also being recorded. So a recording of the meeting as well as a copy of the presentation will be posted on the website. Yes. We can have yep, we can do that.
But it doesn't. You have a, then you work on zoning regulations. So that kind of. We're trying to get kind of that plan.
Any other questions? Okay, well, like I said, there are boards over on the side. If you want to write something down, feel free to kind of leave some parting thoughts on the boards. There are comment cards on the sign-in table, and there is a comment page on the website, newingtontown.center.com. You can provide comments anytime, and we will be in touch when the draft plan is ready. Thank you.